There's so many mysteries to it. For anybody to pretend that they have all the answers to something as perplexing as Egypt,
I think
it's nuts.
this is an area where I often get criticized, but I think when we look at a civilization and what it is and what it's achieving and why it's so special.
In a recent episode of the Joe Rogan Experience, renowned author and researcher Graham Hancock has once again given history enthusiasts something to think about.
It's such an exciting notion. It's such an exciting idea. And it makes sense when you look at these incredible structures that we don't really have an explanation for.
During the discussion, he shared details of an expedition led by Doctor Susanne Bickel, which resulted in the discovery of the tomb of an ancient Egyptian queen, dating back 800,000 years, in an unexpected location. What makes this discovery particularly interesting is that it led to the unveiling of a shocking secret, one that challenges everything we thought we knew about ancient Egyptian civilization. Who was this queen, and what hidden truth did her tomb reveal that could rewrite the history of ancient Egypt? Keep watching to find out. The surprising discovery of the ancient Egyptian royal. In 2011, while Egypt was in the middle of a revolution, with protests and chaos filling the streets, far away from the noise, in the quiet Valley of the Kings, something incredible was about to happen. A group of archaeologists from Switzerland, led by Dr. Susanne Bickel and Dr. Elena Paulin Groth, was working near an ancient tomb called KV40. Their job that day was simple: to install a protective cover over the site to keep it safe. At first, it seemed like regular excavation routines, but as they dug and inspected the area, something unexpected caught their attention. This is where things get more interesting, so pay close attention. Just a short distance from KV40, they noticed an odd, faint outline of what looked like the edge of a hidden shaft sticking out of the ground. It didn't seem to belong to anything they knew. At this point, they were running wild with imaginations, but with the revolution shaking the country, they couldn't afford to take chances. So to protect what they had found, they quickly covered the site with an iron lid and decided to wait until the situation calmed down. For months, they kept quiet about their discovery. Months passed, and the country slowly began to calm. So finally, in January 2012, the team returned to investigate the hidden shaft properly. With permission from Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities,
it's news that greatly distresses the former Minister of Antiques, Zahi Hawass.
In Egypt, we don't have people who knows about museology. Very little. How can you run a museum like this?
they removed the iron cover and peered into the shaft below. Their hearts raced as they descended, clearing away debris and rubble, and it didn't take long for them to realize they had found a tomb that had been untouched and lost for centuries. The tomb was small, with a single chamber of about 4.1 by 2.35 meters carved out of rock and rubble and debris filling most of the space. But as they carefully cleared the dirt, they stumbled on something unexpected. In the chamber was evidence of an older burial from the 18th dynasty. Among the debris, the team found broken pieces of canopic jars, which were used to store the organs of the deceased, as well as jar stoppers. There were also bits of coffins and cartonnage, the linen used in wrapping mummies, along with other items like glass, colorful ancient pottery called faience, leather, and even parts of old furniture. But it gets more exciting because they also discovered the broken mummy of a middle-aged woman who was probably the tomb's original owner. What they didn't expect, however, was the discovery of a partial wooden label with the name Princess Satia on it. But what they struggled to understand was who the label belonged to. Was it the woman in the tomb, or someone else from the past? As they struggled to fix this puzzle, they stumbled on what turned out to be the highlight of this expedition. If you're a lover of ancient Egyptian history, sit tight, because what you're about to hear will absolutely blow your mind. The unexpected discovery of Nemes Bastet. Before the discovery of the tomb that had the remains of the 18th dynasty royal family member, they had found a black wooden coffin decorated with bright yellow hieroglyphs with a small wooden tablet, or stela, that had ancient inscriptions offering clues about the identity of the person that was buried there placed beside it. The archaeologists couldn't believe their eyes. When the coffin was opened, the mystery deepened, as inside lay the mummy of a woman named Nemes Bastet. Nemes Bastet wasn't a queen or a princess, but a chantress of Amun, a temple singer who had dedicated her life to offering songs and prayers for the gods, and the stela beside the coffin, which showed her worshipping the god of the afterlife, was proof to that. The inscriptions on her coffin revealed that she was a woman of high status who had earned a place of honor in her time. Her coffin, made from sycamore wood and beautifully decorated, spoke of a woman who was highly respected in her time. As you would have guessed by now, the tomb was originally built hundreds of years earlier, during the famous 18th dynasty, the same period as great pharaohs like Tutankhamun.
At last, in October 1925, after 3 years of excavating Tutankhamun's tomb, Howard Carter and his team begin to open the king's coffin.
And was only reused over the years, which explains how the remains of Nemes Bastet from the 22nd dynasty ended up there. Signs of this long history were everywhere: broken pottery, pieces of wood, even wasp nests, and water stains that showed the tomb had been open to the elements long before she was laid to rest. What made this find even more remarkable was how intact it was, as most tombs in the Valley of the Kings had been looted long ago, and their treasures had been stolen by grave robbers. But here was a tomb that had survived, with much of its story from thousands of years ago still intact. For archaeologists, it was like stepping back in time, uncovering a piece of history that had been hidden for years. Meanwhile, nearby in KV 40, they uncovered over 80 mummies from different time periods, including men, women, and children from various social classes. These discoveries painted a vivid picture of the valley as not just a royal burial ground, but a place that held the stories of many lives. As the team continued their work, the story of the valley grew even richer. Before now, this area was thought to be reserved for pharaohs and their closest relatives. But how was a temple singer, someone outside the royal family, buried in the Valley of the Kings? Well, it turns out that long ago, in the 18th dynasty, only the royal family and their closest companions were buried in the Valley of the Kings. But by the 21st dynasty, about 500 years later, the government authorized that the tombs be broken into and the materials should be recycled. During the break-in, all valuables like gold and wood, and even amulets from the mummies, including those of the pharaohs, were taken. Those who were tasked with this responsibility knew exactly whose tomb was whose, so they treated the pharaohs' bodies with care, rewrapping them and hiding them in secret places where they were found later.
Put through X-ray machines, then stored in nitrogen bubbles and carried in these special shock-absorbing vehicles. Hollywood movies like The Mummy have always been fascinated by haunted tombs.
But the other bodies didn't show the same respect. The broken skeleton found in one of the tombs, KV 64, was proof of this carelessness. Then, about 100 years later, in the 22nd dynasty, things shifted again. The tombs were no longer just for pharaohs, but also for families of priests and other important people. While the Valley of the Kings was still seen as a sacred place, it became more common to bury people of high rank, even if they weren't royalty. This is how Nemes Bastet, the chantress, ended up in KV 64, but the surprise doesn't end there. More discoveries near KV 64. As Bickel took a closer look at the tombs, she couldn't help but notice an intriguing connection between KV 64 and KV 40. The two tombs were surprisingly close to each other, with KV 64 being a bit larger and older. Bickel began to wonder if KV 40 was built nearby, so that the people buried there could be close to the lady in KV 64, perhaps for some deeper reason. It seemed that KV 40 had also seen at least 2 phases of use, much like KV 64. These phases occurred around the same time and in similar ways, but later, the tomb was looted, and at some point was even ablaze, with signs of fire on the walls, ceilings, and the contents that were scorched and destroyed. Like KV 64, the rooms of KV 40 were filled with fragments of pottery, bits of wood, faience, fabric, and even human remains, most of which were covered in soot, and though a good part of it was destroyed, some fragments were salvaged for further study. Once cleaned, the fragments were sorted into two distinct groups, those from the 18th dynasty and those from the 22nd dynasty, while some were even pieced back together. But that's not all. Among the finds, what caught her attention was a sock, perfectly made for a small adult foot, about a size 3 in UK sizing, clearly designed to be worn with sandals. But Bickel's most fascinating discovery was pottery. After the team carefully laid out all the pottery shards they had found and successfully pieced them together, they were able to reconstruct 120 large jars, which had once held natron, which is a substance used in mummification and ritual remains. One of the seals on these jars had a red plate that seemed to have been deliberately broken and incorporated into the seal. This resembled an ancient ritual known as the breaking of the red pots, a practice that held symbolic meaning. Unlike other jars typically found in ancient Egyptian burial sites, which usually had inscriptions that listed only the contents, these jars were different, because aside from spelling out the jar's content, the inscriptions also had the names and titles of people, which was quite unexpected. Some jars had 2 layers of writing. The first layer had a roughly written inscription and was covered by a white coating, while the second layer had a much neater inscription in yellow, which was a rare color for writing in ancient Egypt.
Another interesting feature of many of these stone jars are the handles on the outside, stone bosses that have holes drilled through them.
In some cases, the second inscription was a cleaner version of the first, but in other cases, the 2 inscriptions were different and had on them its contents and the names of who it was for. Upon a closer examination, it was discovered that the names of the jars belonged to 23 women and 4 men, all of whom were royalty. The men were labeled king's sons, while 12 of the women were called king's daughters, which was a title they held for a lifetime. For some reason, Bickel also believed the names on the jars matched those of Amenhotep III's daughters and granddaughters, whose names appeared in reliefs from other tombs, like TT 192, a noble's tomb in El Asasif. As Bickel continued her work, the discoveries in KV 40 and KV 64 kept piling up, giving her new insights into ancient Egyptian burial practices. But there were a few technical challenges that prevented her from conducting some fascinating analyses. Normally, carbon-14 dating could have helped determine which bodies belonged to the original phase of use and which were from later periods. Unfortunately, the only lab in Egypt that could perform this type of analysis had outdated technology and required a much larger sample size than what they could provide. And because artifacts and remains cannot be removed from Egypt, the necessary work couldn't be done outside the country. In addition to that, samples had been taken to analyze the DNA of the human remains, which could have been another breakthrough. But again, the only lab capable of doing this work was temporarily non-functional. The samples have been stored, and we are waiting for the situation to improve so that this analysis can be carried out. Bickel believes that when the DNA work finally happens, it could offer some exciting revelations, especially since some of the individuals in the tomb might be related to Amenhotep III's royal family, as previously suggested by the inscriptions on the pottery and other finds. Given that KV-64 held the remains of someone outside the royal bloodline, by the early 1980s, as Charles and Diana's marriage faltered, Charles found solace in Camilla. Their relationship evolved into a full-blown affair, which became one of the worst-kept secrets within royal circles. For Diana, discovering the truth about Charles and Camilla was devastating. She once famously said, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." The public, however, was largely unaware of the full extent of the affair at the time. Diana continued to put on a brave face, carrying out her royal duties with grace and charm. Yet the cracks in her marriage with Charles were becoming increasingly visible. Camilla, though rarely in the public eye, remained a looming presence in their relationship. As the years went on, the tension between Diana, Charles, and Camilla only deepened, and the public became more aware. From the moment she married into the British royal family, Lady Diana Spencer seemed to embody the image of a modern-day princess. The life that awaited Diana was far from the fairy tale that people imagined. Her journey as the Princess of Wales was full of emotional turmoil, personal struggles, and public scrutiny, which overshadowed even her humanitarian efforts and the joy of motherhood. Diana entered her marriage with high hopes, but the reality of royal life hit hard. Almost immediately, she found herself struggling to adapt to the rigid structure of the royal family. But the heart of Diana's troubles was the distant and cold relationship with her new husband, Prince Charles. Though they appeared happy in public, behind closed doors, their marriage was something else. And you know the most painful part of it all? Diana's heart had been scarred by the divorce of her parents when she was just a young girl. She had hoped that her own marriage would be a refuge from the pain of her childhood, a union filled with love, laughter, and joy. She dreamed of a partnership that would be the opposite of her parents' failed relationship. But fate had other plans. As she stood by Charles, she felt the sting of betrayal, the ache of disappointment, and the crushing weight of unfulfilled dreams.
It is announced from Buckingham Palace that with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate. Their Royal Highnesses have no plans to divorce, and their constitutional positions are unaffected.
The little girl who had once hoped for a love that would last a lifetime was now a woman facing the harsh reality of a love that had never truly been hers to begin with. Despite her public image as a glamorous princess, Diana often felt isolated and unloved. She famously remarked in an interview, "There were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." The emotional toll of her troubled marriage began to manifest in physical ways. Diana struggled with bulimia, an eating disorder that haunted her for much of her life as a royal. The pressures of royal life, coupled with her feelings of inadequacy and the constant media scrutiny of her appearance, contributed to her battle with food. Diana later spoke openly about her bulimia, admitting that it was a way of coping with the immense emotional strain she was under. That was not even all. In addition to bulimia, Diana faced periods of severe depression. She felt trapped in the royal family, with few people to confide in. When Eugene Levy grabbed the microphone and started to cry profusely at John Candy's funeral, everyone wondered what suddenly happened to him. Many attributed this outburst of emotion to their beautiful old friendship, while others suspected that Eugene knew something the world didn't know.
John was, he was a sweetheart. He was he was truly one of the funny guys, naturally funny. He was great. He was great at Second City.
Now, Eugene Levy has come out with a very shocking revelation about John. What did he say, and why should it be regarded as important? Join us as we explore Eugene Levy's unusual relationship with John Candy and the new revelation. The unexpected revelation. Anyone who knew John Candy in his lifetime would agree that the young man was incomplete without his friend, Eugene Levy. Their connection was more than just work and Hollywood. It was personal. In fact, countless times Eugene has affirmed that the loss of John has left a gap in his life, a gap so deep that no one else would ever be able to fill. Eugene believed that John passed away rather too soon.
Good evening. Some stories we're following. Tributes pour in for one of Canada's most famous entertainers. John Candy is dead at the age of 43.
But that's not even half of the gist. Eugene has just come out with a deeper and shocking revelation about John Candy. This revelation will definitely leave you on the edge of your seat, so brace yourself. Eugene shared that John Candy lived his life as a big-hearted guy. He had this natural way of being funny that seemed to just come out of him effortlessly. Whether on the Second City stage or in his unforgettable movie roles, he always stood out. Eugene believed that what made his friend special was how his real personality came through in everything he did. Everyone always noticed his charm, and it really stuck with anybody who came in contact with him. Even with his growing success, Eugene believes that there was always a shadow that haunted John from his childhood days. It was a sad shadow that never entirely left him, regardless of anywhere he was. By 1976, John had become a household name in Canada, especially in his role in comedy sitcoms. His characters like Johnny LaRue and William B. Williams made audiences laugh.
It's time for Cooking with LaRue, fast recipes for limited budgets with Chef Johnny LaRue.
Hi, I'm Johnny LaRue, as you already know.
Still behind the humor, there was a quiet sadness that never seemed to fade. John's humor was a gift, but it was also a shield, something to keep the world from seeing the heartache he still carried from losing his father so young. While Hollywood took notice of his talent in the late 70s, and John made his way into American films, at his core, he still missed his father and still carried that pain with him. Throughout the 80s, John became a familiar face in Hollywood, being one of the funniest and kindest actors in the business. Friends would say he was the life of the party, but there were moments when he would go quiet and lost in his thoughts. He was said to always wonder what his dad would have thought about his success if he were alive. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, his health was catching up with him. The same heart disease that took his father at 35 cast a dark cloud over John's own life. He had several risk factors for heart disease, including a family history of early heart problems. His dad had passed away from a heart attack way too young, and John could sense it was his time too.
John Candy had a history of binge eating and extreme dieting, but remained severely obese throughout most of his adult life. However, there are reports that there was another aspect of John's life that can also have a devastating effect on the heart.
To be fair, John Candy had a pretty good run in his career. In 1987, he made a big move in his career, teaming up with Steve Martin in the Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, a film written and directed by John Hughes. The film clicked with people, getting a lot of praise and raking in almost $50 million at the US box office. But yet again, underneath all the laughs, Eugene Levy believes that John felt the heavy expectations and stress that come with being successful, and wasn't entirely over the moon with the excitement. While some of his friends would agree that some of his projects hit the mark, others like Eugene feel like his projects were a mixed bag. John Candy had flops like A Speed Zone and a Uncle Buck in 1989. Those films were hits, but failed to do well in the box office comparatively with other films that year. In 1991, he was in Only the Lonely, a movie that got good reviews, but also fell flat at the box office. His stint in Nothing But Trouble went on the infamous flop list alongside Delirious and Once Upon a Crime, which added to his load. Despite the flops, and looking back on his career, he seemed to long for more chances. Sadly, unfinished projects haunted him. John was meant to play Ignatius J. Reilly in a movie adaptation of The Confederacy of Dunces, but it never happened. It was almost like fate was cruel to him. He was a fantastic comedian, but maybe not so lucky. At one point, he was considered for a role in the remake of The Last Holiday, but that part went to Queen Latifah. There was also talk of him starring in a comedy with John Hughes and Sylvester Stallone called Bartholomew vs. Nee, but those plans faded too. Even in animated movies, they wrote roles for him in the Red Feather movie, the Turkey movie, and Pocahontas, but they all got cut after he passed. John's career was filled with joy and love, but the shadows of loss were always there.
People who are movie stars from different generations. The younger, of course, is John Candy, and Maureen O'Hara has made 56 motion pictures, including all-time classics like The Quiet Man and Miracle on 34th Street.
Amidst this storm, however, John Candy shared his life with his lovely wife, and they had 2 kids together, Christopher Michael and Jennifer Ann. He was a devoted Roman Catholic, finding comfort in his faith through life's ups and downs. Living in Brentwood, Los Angeles, he loved the sunshine and hanging out with friends, but more importantly, he loved Eugene Levy so much. The two of them shared so much bond, love, and even secrets that no one else knew about. You might wonder why these two were so close. The similarities in their backgrounds and upbringing will leave you shocked. The unusual connection of John and Eugene. Although they were born into different families and grew up in different localities, Eugene Levy and John Candy's lives mirror each other in a way that amazes one. Eugene Levy grew up in a modest Jewish family in downtown Hamilton, Ontario. His mom, Rebecca, was a homemaker, while his dad, Joseph, worked as a foreman at an auto plant. He had siblings, Fred and Barbara. His family background was poor, with his mom coming from Glasgow and his dad's safari roots returning to Spain and Bulgaria. Life wasn't always a walk in the park, but those experiences shaped him into the man he became. While at Westdale Secondary, Eugene was known not for his comedy skills, but for being a leader. He was the student council president. Later at McMaster University, he discovered his love for film, serving as vice president of the McMaster Film Board, a student film group. Just like his friend, John Candy, on the other hand, was born on October 31, 1950 in Toronto, but grew up in Newmarket, Ontario. His upbringing was modest, shaped by the working-class roots of his Catholic family. Life wasn't always easy, and it soon became even more difficult when John was just 5 years old. His father, Sidney, passed away from heart complications at the age of 35. The loss left a void that John would carry with him for the rest of his life. John's mother of Polish descent worked hard to raise him and his siblings. Their tiny home at 27 Woodville Avenue in East York held memories both sweet and painful, but it was a place where John's kind and gentle spirit began to form. He was a boy with big dreams, but life had its way of throwing hurdles. In high school, John excelled in football, dreaming of a career as a professional player. However, a knee injury crushed that dream. Those close to him have even testified to how John had always thought football was him, but sometimes life has other plans. After the injury, John's life took a different turn. He enrolled at Centennial College, planning to study journalism, but something inside him pulled him toward the arts. He found solace in acting, and soon it became his passion. He moved on to McMaster University, where he fully embraced his new path. In 1971, John landed a small role in a play called Creeps Film, a humble beginning that would spark a long and beloved career. He began appearing in small roles on Canadian TV shows and films, working hard for every part.
He's made you laugh, he's made you cry, and now he's making movies.
Background action.
Wait in place.
Hysterical, Rich.
Hold on.
Action.
His breakthrough came in 1972 when he joined the Second City Toronto's famous improv group. That's where people first started noticing his unique comedic talent. In that same year, miraculously, Eugene's big break also came when he landed a role in the Toronto version of Godspell. What was meant to be a short show turned into a huge hit, helping not just Eugene, but also stars like Victor Garber, Andrea Martin, Gilda Radner, and Martin Short. Kick-starting their careers that period was something special, buzzing with energy and hope, but also with a bit of uncertainty. Yet it was clear these two had something special, a talent that would develop over time. Eugene, on his part, later found himself at Second City in Toronto, where his humor flourished. The two finally met during an audition for a partnership with Christopher Guest on mockumentary Like a Mighty Wind. This show let the two shine in a new way and also grew the bond between them. Eugene's career took a surprising direction in his later years when he teamed up with his son John to create a TV show, Creek. Eugene and John infused warmth, humor, and depth into their characters, and it wasn't just comedy. It was a heartfelt story about family love and redemption, sharing the screen with their kids. The Dying Days. In March 1994, tragedy struck while filming The Wagons East in Durango City, Mexico. John Candy died in his sleep at just 43 years old. The news hit everyone hard. A spokesperson said it was a heart attack, but those who knew him realized that his struggles had been building up for years. John often turned to food when stressed. John Candy's life was celebrated as a fairy tale, but the reality behind the scenes was far more complicated. He faced several issues in a mental health facility, especially with the pressures of public life and a very troubled mind. John struggled with severe depression, and his self-esteem plummeted in an environment where he often felt isolated. This part, according to Eugene Levy, was where he came into the picture. He knew that John was going down the mental hole, and he felt the best he could do for a friend was to present him with a space of peace. That's not all. As John Candy's dying days began to knock more profusely, his friendship with Eugene Levy grew more and more, and eventually became a source of public interest. Sports was one thing the two friends loved. In 1991, they teamed up with Wayne Gretzky to own a piece of the Toronto Argonauts, a Canadian Football League team. They shook things up in the sports world, making headlines with bold moves like signing NFL star Raghib Ismail. They were always seen together with their families during games. Until today, their roles in Steven Spielberg's 1941 movie remain historic for anyone who knew the two friends. Their performance was the talk of the town, but more importantly, John's presence on screen caught people's attention. John Candy was the lovable, big-hearted guy on screen, the kind you couldn't help but root for. He had a way of making you laugh and feel simultaneously. In all of this, Eugene saw him as a friend, not a competitor. And what do you think of Eugene Levy's friendship with John Candy? We would love to know in the comments. If you enjoyed watching this video, don't forget to leave a like, share it with your family and friends, and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our next updates. Also, click the next video on your screen to enjoy more exciting content.